Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today I would be analyzing the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper of 12th December 2017. Now let us begin. Now we begin from page 1. Now the article which is important from your examination point of view is about the WTO deal. Now the issue of the WTO deal has already been covered in yesterday's DNS, and you may refer to the 11th December 2017's DNS to further understand this. And therefore, we would not be analyzing this news today. Let's move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 7. Now from this article, what we need to know is what is DNA profiling. Now DNA profiling is also known as DNA fingerprinting, is a technique used for identification of an individual by examining that individual's DNA. Now another aspect which this article talks about is the Center for DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics, or CDFD. Now the CDFD is the nodal center for DNA fingerprinting and diagnostics. Now this center is under the Department of Biotechnology in Ministry of Science and Technology. Now hopefully till here you have understood what is DNA profiling, what is the mandate for the Center for DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics, and the department under which it functions. Now hopefully if any of this is asked in your prelims examination, you would be able to answer. Now moving on to our next article. Now on page 8, the lead article focuses on the internal politics of America and is therefore not necessary from your UPSC examination point of view. And we would not be analyzing this article. What we would be focusing upon is the article below it, the Powerplay in Peacekeeping. Now we would be analyzing this news in 3 steps. Now the first argument that the article makes is that India is a leading power in the United Nations peacekeeping force. Now India has provided roughly 2 lakh troops till date to the United Nations peacekeeping force. India has also participated in roughly 50 UN peacekeeping missions. Apart from this, we have provided assets in form of helicopters, arms, etc. and training facilities to the UN peacekeeping force, to the UN police and other organizations. Now the second step or the argument that the article makes is that China is a rising power in the United Nations peacekeeping force. Now China is the second largest to the fund of the United Nations peacekeeping force. It has also started providing troops and assets to the United Nations peacekeeping force. Moreover, China has provided $1 billion to the United Nations Peace and Development Fund. Now India had intended that through its contribution to the United Nations peacekeeping force, it can increase its power in the United Nations. But this power is being challenged by China through its rise in the United Nations peacekeeping force. Now hopefully up till here, we have been able to understand what is the role of India in the United Nations peacekeeping force, on how is China rising in the United Nations peacekeeping force, and how this rise of China impacts India. Now this article is important from your mains examination point of view in the international relations section. Now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this article from page 8. Now this article talks about the recent admission of India into the Weizmann Arrangement. As to understand this, we first need to know as to what is the Weizmann Arrangement. Now the Weizmann Arrangement is the first multilateral arrangement on export control for conventional weapons and for dual use goods and technology. Now, to understand further as to what is meant by conventional weapons, it means small arms, tanks, aero engines, etc. While the term dual use means those technologies or goods that can be used for civilian purposes as well as military purposes. Now, example of such goods and technology can be proportional systems, sensors, lasers, etc. Now, moreover, the Weizmann Arrangement began in 1996. Now, up till here, we have covered what is the Weizmann Arrangement, when did it begin, what does it do, and what are conventional weapons, and also what is meant by dual use goods and technology. Now, this is very important in your prelims examination from a current affairs point of view and in your mains examination from an international relations point of view. Now, the article also talks about other export control mechanisms such as the Nuclear Supplies Group, the Missile Technology Control Group or MTCR, the Australia Group, and therefore it becomes necessary to understand the Weizmann Arrangement in a comparative format also. Now, the first is the Australia Group, the second is the Missile Technology Control Regime or MTCR, the third is the Nuclear Supplies Group or NSG, and the fourth is the Hague Code of Conduct. Now, the Australia Group was formed in 1985, and the mandate of the Australia Group is to prevent the export and use of chemical and biological weapons. MTCR was formed in 1987 to control unmanned delivery systems, which are more than 500 kgs and have a range of more than 300 kilometers. Now it says unmanned delivery system to specify missiles. And the term unmanned separates it from aeroplanes. Now this nuclear supply group began in 1974 to prevent proliferation of nuclear weapons and nuclear related exports. While the Hague Code of Conduct began in 2002 and its mandate should be seen in addition to that of the MTCR. It intends to prevent proliferation of ballistic missiles. Now, up till here, you have understood what is the mandate of the Australia Group, what is the mandate of MTCR, and what is the mandate of the nuclear supply groups and of the Hague Code of Conduct. Now, it is important to understand the differences between these four export control mechanisms, wherein a question might be asked in your prelims as to what is the difference between the Australia Group and MTCR, or between any of these four mechanisms. Now, moving on to the last aspect of this article is of India's membership. Now, India is not a member of the Australia Group. And similarly, India is not a member of the Nuclear Supplies Group. While India became a member of MTCR in 2016. And similarly, India became a member of the Hague Code of Conduct in 2016. Now, up till here, you would be able to answer as to what is the Weizmann Arrangement and can also easily compare the five export control mechanisms, which are the Weizmann Arrangement, Australia Group, MTCR, NSG, and the Hague Code of Conduct. Now, moving on to the next article. Now, we have taken this news from page 9. Now, the article focuses on two aspects. The first aspect is the problem, and the second aspect is the solution. Now, the problem which the article talks about is the increased CO2 pollution, which has severely affected public health. Now, for the problem of the increased CO2 solution, the article has also given a solution, which is to have a change in the energy mix. Now, the question is, what is meant by the term energy mix? It means to change the energy mix in which we would have an increase in renewable energy and a decrease in the current usage of fossil fuel. Now, another question that comes up is how would this be achieved? Now the article gives a solution to this in the form of a carbon tax. Now a carbon tax is a tax on the emissions of CO2, which should be applied at the upstream, meaning it should be applied at the production and at the transportation level, at ports, mines, etc. Now the article further highlights certain advantages of this carbon tax. Now the first advantage is that it would curb emissions. The second advantage is that it would increase the revenue of the government, which could be used to finance renewable energy projects. So therefore, taxes on the fossil fuel can be used to finance the renewable energy projects. Now there are certain disadvantages to the carbon tax also. The carbon tax is a regressive tax, which means that it would increase the cost of essential commodities, which would invariably affect the poor people of India more. Now the article has also given certain solutions to this problem, which would be to give cash transfers to the poor and to give free electricity, travel allowance, etc. to the poor. Now up till here, we have covered as to what is the energy mix, how can it be achieved, what is a carbon tax, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of this carbon tax. Now this topic is important from your mains examination point of view in the social issues section. Now moving on to our next article. Now we've taken this article from page 9. Now we would analyze this article by first understanding what is the crux of the article. Now the article has stated that the public health centers in rural India suffer from poor electricity supply. Now this affects the ability of the public healthcare center to provide 24/7 emergency care, and it hampers with the use of cold chain equipments which are used to store vaccines, samples, etc. Moreover, it increases the use of generators and diesel and therefore increases the cost for maintaining the public healthcare center. Now the article further gives a solution for this problem. It recommends the use of solar-powered public healthcare center. Now in reference to this, it gives the example of the successful Chhattisgarh model, wherein certain areas have successfully implemented the use of solar-powered public healthcare centers. Now this has shown a lower infant mortality rate in those regions, an increase in child vaccination, and a higher patient coverage. Now this covers the analysis of this article. And now we move on to our next article. Now we have taken this news from page 12. Now as you know, the United States under Donald Trump has decided to move its embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now because of this, Israel has asked the European countries to also move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But the European countries have said a strict no to this plan. Now as you know, this news is in transition, and to further understand in depth the Jerusalem problem and the US policy, you can refer to our DNS of 7th December 2017. Moreover, this issue would be covered in depth in the upcoming January edition of the Focus magazine. Now we come to an end to the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.